Hi, Anand.
Episode 13.
Yes, and this, as we have decided on our amazing content creation journey, that this is going to be the last episode for this season.
Yes, and I'm very excited.
We don't do anything in half measures at Voiro. If you want to make sure that we are creating content, we're going the whole hog and doing seasons and episodes. And I'd like some PR around this as well. And I want to request for the next season, I'd like some post. Maybe Santosh can put in some music, some highlights.
The reason we're taking a pause is to just take a step back, think. It won't be more than a couple of weeks. And put out some ideas and even invite ideas from our listeners and our teammates for what we want to do for season 2. But I've liked season 1, and at the end of this episode, we'll reflect a little bit. But do you know why 13 episodes?
I have no clue, and I'm pretty sure that you're going to shed some intense light on this
Nothing
very
intense.
random number.
Every example I ever drop in our office has some pop culture reference, obviously, or some content reference, right? The first streaming show that I ever watched was House of Cards on Netflix.
And they had
every
13?
season was 13 episodes.
Oh, man.
And after the first season, and it was one of the first shows where they dropped all of it in one shot, and that itself was a new model. But I remember a lot of people said, why 13, why 13? And we said, House of Cards, and a deck is 54, and you tried to make some reference about how there's going to be 4 seasons, and that is why. And of course, then they went and made way more than 4 seasons and messed it up.
Yeah, and then
So
they gave their main lead enough time to get into this whole Me Too scam.
Of course.
Anyway.
But therefore 13 episodes. And I'm excited to do the season ending episode of the Voiro Podcast
Yeah.
today.
I know that you've got a lot of feedback from people, and I did too. Vignesh, if you're listening to this podcast, I have passed on your message. And if you want to have any DJ type requests on what we should speak of, please make sure that you text me and we'll definitely do it.
Yeah, we'd love to, and we love to incorporate all of those into season 2 and beyond.
All right. Okay. So what's the big news?
All right, let's first talk big tech. This week saw a roundup of various articles, events in the world of big tech, and let's start with Apple. DigiDay carried a post this week where they had snooped around some job postings and concluded fairly decisively that Apple's launching their own DSP. And of course, everyone has stood around and thrown spears at Apple for doing so. I think all is fair in business as long as it's not unethical.
But I'm having a hard time thinking of Tim Cook walking back and forth on a black stage saying, and then we have Apple's DSP with our new ad formats. I mean, come on. Come on. This is a fall from grace. Please.
Look, for me, this has a very Netflix-esque feel because this is also a company that shunned advertising for many years and is now going to redo it. Now, we've expounded endlessly on this podcast about the benefits of advertising as a monetization model. I think that in both Apple and Netflix case, these are two companies that have been known for years as having the ability to deeply understand their users and consumers. And I am actually quite excited to see how they put that to use. With everything that's going on from a regulatory standpoint, with everything that's going on in the world of identity and privacy, a big chunk of what will finally emerge when the dust settles is whether or not parties have the authority and the right to understand consumers deeply when they are not their consumers directly. And that's why first-party data, and that's why clean rooms, and that's why UID 2.0 and other forms of identity. But these are two companies who have reached this stage in both their lives simply because they fundamentally understood their users. So I'm excited to see how they put that to use. I mean, there's other questions that have been asked in the article which make sense. Are they going to enable this on the App Store? Are they going to enable this on every app on the iOS ecosystem?
What do you think? As in, generically, what would you think?
I think they will set themselves up to do whatever they want.
But that's a prerogative of any company, right?
But I think knowing Apple, they'll think ahead. They will... See, every watchdog on the planet is going to look at them because of app tracking transparency, ATT, which effectively killed several other social apps especially.
Right. Just to stop you there, maybe this is one of the things they're doing to be able to serve the ecosystem, right? Because
I'm sure that's how they'll position it.
yeah, because if ATT stopped people from actually downloading apps, and the App Store was the only gateway to actually downloading these apps, maybe a DSP can provide for placements.
Yeah.
Because they have these two little ad formats right now, right? Versus Apple Search.
I mean, look, this is a series of shrewd, ruthless business moves that a giant can make, right? Where they first said, all right, you guys cannot monetize because we have to respect the privacy. And they went as far as, billboards where the Apple symbol changed into the lock symbol. I remember we loved that ad where everyone from the barista to a friend down the street follows this person around. And so I think they'll definitely, the moves are basically saying you can't access data. Users have the ability to opt in and
You don't want to choke discovery either,
correct.
right?
And now saying we'll do it ourselves. So
there could be a good side to this whole thing versus just throwing their hat into the ring. And
Always.
definitely
always,
there is.
I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
But I think that the regulatory bodies that be they're also under a lot of stress, right? I know PDPA was withdrawn today here in India. PDPA is the
Personal Data Protection Act.
the Indian equivalent of the GDPR.
GDPR, yeah. So talking to Rohan this morning as well, because I was like, give me the top lines, because I just know PDPA was something that we were all waiting for. It caused a lot of chaos. It was supposed to be presented to the parliament. It hasn't.
So they just pulled the bill back.
They pulled the bill back. So what Rohan was telling me also in the morning was that, it was just presented in a vacuum. So there is just before this podcast started, he forwarded me this infogram. I'm going to make this a word as well.
course.
An infographic, internetfreedom.in, and where they talk about the Data Protection Act of 2021. This work started in 2011. So between 2011 and 2014, what happened was that the Ministry of Personnel started this work, and then they abandoned it. Then they restarted it again in 2017. In October 2012, they did something in between, and they started putting it together. And then in 2017, they resurrected it again. And then it has been moving very, very, very slowly. So if you read, and I remember you and I and Arjun, we went through the PDPA
I remember. Yeah.
draft. And
You gave us homework.
I gave you homework because I was like, what does this mean for us? What does this mean for, our customers, us as an organization, us as an industry? It seems on paper extremely watertight, but there are no, there are no places for anybody to address grievances. I don't think the laws are, constructed as well for me to be able to go somewhere and tell people that I have my data has been used without my consent, right? And what happens then? So so because of this vacuum in which this bill has been presented, where there is no framework or there's no government machinery to be able to take on either the consequences of not adhering to this bill or the benefits of adhering to this bill also, is basically where people have, stood up and said, there are a lot of issues. And so they protested this entire bill. And so now they pulled it off. So we have a long road ahead of us. And with this whole cookieless world coming through, our large companies that in India who are actually shoring up all the kinds of, what do you may call it, first party data,
Enhancements, innovations,
and
initiatives.
gosh, I've forgotten English today. So yes, so just to start off from the top, the fact that a lot of our companies in India like Flipkart and Airtel and Jio and all of these guys who have really worked really hard to maintain and manage their first party data, it has put them in good stead as far as the cookieless world coming in is concerned. But it also would have made them sit up and try and understand what this PDPA bill is going to do to them, right? And now I'm sure they have a lot of representatives on there to be able to understand how they can actually figure out how they can work with this PDPA bill. And this is where all of these issues have come up saying, hey, how are we supposed to know whether we're doing something right or wrong? How do we defend ourselves, or how do we mitigate risk for ourselves as well? And that's where everybody's kind of at an impasse. So since I spoke about the cookieless world scenario, what do you think about the fact that Google is once more kick the can down the road, in the words of Kieran O'Kane?
One of the things he said is stop trying, right? Which is a school of thought that exists. Look, with everything that's happening with regulation, with Apple, outside of the need to regulate and policy, it's definitely a massive opportunity, and that's why Apple's chasing it. I believe they don't report ad revenue right now.
Who, Apple?
They report it under a services category, which is growing. It's growing really quickly. But in the spirit of breaking up big tech, which is what regulators have always been trying, or they've been trying to do lately.
That was Elizabeth Warren's big thing, right? That was a war cry when she was running for president.
It still is. In the spirit of regulators also having been accused of failing. There is a lot of people who believe GDPR has done more harm than good, and it actually never worked, and it's caused a lot more pain. Policymakers will be waiting to figure out how to manage Apple and make sure that they don't come across as having been sleeping at the wheel again. And at the same time, Google moving cookies out, Google possibly breaking themselves up. All of this, I think, are things that we never expected to happen to big tech, because we thought they were too big for anyone to touch them and too big for them to fail. Even with cookies getting postponed, sure, they put down their justifications around why they want to do it and the privacy sandbox that they want to see adopted better. But for me, it's an interesting series of events because it shows that big tech is a little bit vulnerable. In the world where everyone's moving towards more community-driven initiatives, in the world where we're transitioning to Web3, in the world where policymakers are actually getting stronger. They've tried stuff that maybe didn't work out, but they're getting smarter. They're not traditional government organizations that don't understand tech. They've spent a good part of the last decade understanding tech because that's where consumers have gone, that's where technology has gone, and they've had to do it. I remember, it's an unrelated example, but I remember about 7-8 years ago when Uber landed in India, the government didn't know how to deal with the fact that those drivers were neither employees, nor were they contractors, and they were They were part of the gig economy, and there were no rules in place for it. And the policymakers have had to reimagine their own approach to technology. And one of the bets I'm going to make is that a significant part of the next decade will require policymakers to adapt faster, but big tech cannot just operate freely. They'll have to play ball.
Yeah, so one of the things that I find funny, right, is that the chips have been laid out on this board. So as a policymaker, wouldn't you actually run this forward a bit and actually create certain kinds of guidelines, and then that converts itself into policy? Because either we are not privy to it. I'm sure that they're doing it because it's a macro level, right? And these wheels turn really slowly, and you have so much already that already has momentum. For you to change direction or for you to add something more, it must be nuts. So in the same way of what you're talking about when Uber came to India, this whole PDPA thing is also it started off as a reaction to GDPR. And now it's becoming far more a reality because, the alternative to a cookieless world is having large companies really understand you as a person. And that's, I feel, a little more dangerous in terms of, my identity and, you fingerprinting me going into a filter bubble, me unable to get, I won't be able to get out of that filter bubble because, you've made sure that I've been typecast literally into this one space. And India, like has maybe 5 or 10 large content providers, right, and owners. And we have a billion and growing in population, a lot of them depending upon their mobile phones and the information that they get from these mobile phones. So the kind of influence that you can end up having on majority of our population, if there is no watchdog on this and there is no policy, it is going to be very dangerous for us. We could go down exactly the way the US went down in their elections, for example. Because can you imagine during our elections and our WhatsApps blowing up and people just going into some kind of a bubble where they just cannot get out of it? It's just dangerous, and we need structure, we need framework. And so I'm hoping that this PDPA thing comes back onto the table.
I'm sure it will. I'm sure this is one of many
sooner
steps.
Than later, because everything is kind of hotting up now. Everything is moving towards you have to do something about it.
Exchangewire thinks that everything that's going on right now is good for independent ad tech, which in the larger scheme of things encourages competition and drives innovation and is good.
And choice for businesses. So today, I remember we were reminiscing about the time when we were raising money long back when we started the company, and somebody told us don't use the word ad tech because it's a black box. And then somewhere down the line, every time we thought of doing something, somebody would say, "Oh, but isn't Google already doing this?" Not that we were in like front and center competition to Google or whatever, but we would keep hearing these refrains, right? And imagine if you really wanted to do something that would differentiate yourself or give a business some amount of choice. Okay.
I was reading an article that you posted on Slack the other day from Tubular Labs
Yeah.
about social video trends and kind of what micro community is going to get you what kind of results on video. And it's something that marketers have been paying attention to. And I went down this rabbit hole that took me from there to Vitalik to Web3 to Alexis Ohanian, and I went all over the place. But it got me thinking about where the internet is today from a monetization standpoint, from a community standpoint. And that's one of the things that I'm really excited about. I have not wrapped my head around Web3 entirely, but I've been trying to read as much as I can. And there's a lot of information that is available that breaks it down in terms of where it is right now, the fact that it's not going to be as complicated as it is right now, and the fact that the application layer that eventually gets developed will be just as easy for us to use as email today or as a payment system today. But I was very intrigued by a couple of related posts that I read, because what the Tubular Labs blog was saying is that there are micro communities of maybe 1 million users, and those users are predisposed to making certain kinds of transactions or commerce. A few months ago in our office, we were talking about this concept of a mass of niches. And that's kind of where the internet is going in terms of this ability to build stuff that's community driven. There is this seminal blog post in 2021 by the founder of Ethereum, Vitalik, which talks about the fact that the only scarce resource that everyone really needs to think about is legitimacy, and he applies it everywhere. It's a post that took a few rounds of rereading for me to sort of wrap my head around 10% of it. Imagine. But he talks about how legitimacy as this higher order acceptance of events or protocols or practices is something that can be driven by brute force, by fear, by performance, by fairness, by participation. There are many ways to do it. But if you think about what's happening today in the world of the internet at large, in geopolitics, or even in our industry, a lot of what everyone's trying to do is to understand and focus on legitimacy. Something as simple, we won't call it simple, but something like ads.txt, which of course, I remember Radko had a poll a few weeks ago where he said, how do you say it? Is it ads.txt or ads.text?
What do you say? I say TXT.
I'm inconsistent.
I say TXT.
You say TXT?
Yeah. That's because I keep hearing podcasts where they just talk about ads.txt. So I just adopted it. It's not like I'm original or anything.
But ads.txt is, again, an attempt to transfer legitimacy as an object through the bitstream.
Even what we were reading about what Sincera was doing, being able to read what the ID streams.
Correct.
And
we broke this down last week.
Yeah, we broke this down last week. Again, there is this concept of legitimacy, right? About how much you may be having a bunch of stuff as audiences, but how much of it actually is being absorbed into the streams, and which of these providers are actually legitimate. So there is a fair bit of transparency that is going on. And there is this thing about this concept of legitimacy, right? A lot of times people actually do it to prove it otherwise. So, like for example, this coming back to the Tubular little post that I shared with you, there's this hashtag called TikTok made me buy it. I mean, in India we don't have TikTok, right? And I find it funny that we keep talking about TikTok, but we've never really used TikTok or are not using TikTok as much as we could have if we were in the TikTok world. But we do have a lot of TikTok equivalents in India as well. And we have stuff that's happening, on Instagram. And Instagram is like hugely commerce driven, especially in India. And TikTok is not far behind outside in the US and in other geographies where it's available. But it's very interesting as to what all people actually buy and how they correlate behavior versus what products they are likely to buy. So, for example, if you're following travel content that has castles and World Heritage sites, you may be buying Asian travel books or mirrorless cameras or bear protection. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that you can collate over the long tail. And I started to look at my own buying behavior on Instagram. My God, I do so much shopping on Instagram, and my feed is just filled with 80% people who are selling me stuff. And I'm happy because that's the way I discover stuff. Where do you discover all of your?
I remember the first time I met you, right before we started Voiro. Your inbox was filled with ads, and I asked you how you put up with it. And you said, "What do you mean? I like it. I invite it. I want to know.
I want to know what's going on
out there."
I can't remember the name of that one particular. There used to be one service that you could. It was like a plugin for your Gmail, and it would actually filter out all these promotions and ads, and you could go in. This is before the promos tab, etc. Came about, and you could actually go and act on it later on. But I still love it. I still do. But I really think that I need another email ID because, man, this is getting nuts because I can't really find the stuff that I want to find because everybody wants your email ID today. Everybody wants to know that. Everybody wants to put you into their first-party data logs. You want to know too, but then how do you manage it? Like, how do I manage this communication at the end of the day? So that's where we are at.
There's two other things we were reading this week. One is DIGIDAY talked about how Instagram is now paying media companies to post reels.
Why not?
Why not?
I say why not?
It's a promoted post. It's advertising.
Yeah, and you need content at the end of the day.
Yeah.
You need it's like subscriber revenue is not as much as advertiser revenue, but it's so dependable because you've already locked that subscriber in for the entire year. So paying a content creator who's a professional content creator.
Paying a creator, exactly. That creator is now, the definition is now extended to a media company, but the way I see it, you're paying a creator.
Making it worth their while.
Bloomberg carried an article 2 days ago about this increasing trend of podcast guests who pay hosts
Hey
to
man,
be
are
on
you
their
paying
show.
me? Because I like to raise an invoice for this.
But look at what's happening, right? The power of communities.
I think people are finally realizing that we've got to be paid. That content is expensive to make. Time is money, right?
And this led me down to a very interesting podcast episode where Alex Ohanian, the founder of Reddit, was talking about the early days of Reddit and how for many years it didn't innovate. It just sat around as a product. And the only thing that barely kept it going before it then U-turned and started to thrive was the fact that the power of community was so strong. There's a lot to learn about Web3 and where the internet is going and the broader benefits that have already been tabled today. For example, that it's far more inclusive and beneficial to creators from a monetization standpoint. The lesser there is a need for you to satisfy the needs of a big tech company or a platform, it's better for you as a creator where you can create a relationship with a smaller group of community of users that are built around a specific type of buy, like what Tubular Labs is talking about. That community likes mirrorless cameras, and you can build an entire community and a sustainable one
And
around
thrive.
it.
Yeah.
And thrive.
I don't know, some podcasts ago you spoke about this and I'm drawing a blank on which one it was, where you said, you can actually have, why not? Why can't you have a thriving community of 10,000 people who pay you?
Yes.
And you write for them,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So so see, at the end of the day, I think what the shift between Web 2.0 and Web 3.0 is the fact that one is commerce is the center of everything. Two is I feel like people who were born in Web 2.0 and who are the cusp of Web 3.0 have grown up, right? Because they're like, I need to buy my most expensive coffee with 3 layers of cream and whatever caramel in it, and it costs actual cash.
Yeah.
And and I need to make ends meet because if I'm spending all my time creating content which people enjoy and I'm engaging other people's time, that means there has to be something that I'm like that compensates for it. Initially, it was gifts. A lot of people did a lot of gifts and they gave them a lot of gifts and things like that. But today, you need money. You need money to survive. What do you think about this podcast and paying for the podcast? I know that there were these statements about how
You have to disclose it.
you disclose it and
I think it's always wise to disclose it. Disclosing any product placement, any promoted post, any ad is something that is, I think, hygiene. It can still be an interesting conversation if the guest is and the topic is interesting enough, and I have already built enough trust where I know that I will. I mean, most podcasts I listen to today, um, there are a handful where I will just listen to every episode they put out. Great, a guest paid you. I'm happy you're able to sustain your podcast. But I know that you've curated that guest, even though they're not taking anyone who will pay you. I have enough trust in the people that I have chosen to listen to regularly that I'm happy for them. It's nice for me to know that it's a paid post, but if it's a podcast that I will just listen to, doesn't matter what they put out there, then I'm okay.
There's this online platform, Guestio, that's in this Bloomberg article, which I found very fascinating. They've raised $1 million to build this marketplace. And it's a two-sided marketplace. So I can put myself up as a guest where you can you can pay me and I will appear on your podcast, or you could be a fledgling podcaster, an interviewer, and you can say that I will pay for you to be on my podcast. So it's connecting both people who are creating content and who are also people who have opinions. Again, time is money, right? And the other one is audience creation. So if there's somebody who was very popular, who you wanted to have on your podcast today. So for example, more Indian context, Alia Bhatt, and the fact that she's come out with this new Netflix series. I forget what it's called.
I forget.
What's it called? What's the Netflix series? Darlings. And apparently there's big furor on it about how she's like promoting domestic.
Quick.
Yeah, domestic violence. And I got up this morning to all of this stuff. Now, if we had to have her on our podcast and she was on this Guestio platform and I had to pay her, I'd pay her. I'd pay her to come and talk about what she's doing. And it's her time, it's her money. She's a content creator, she's an artist, she's a producer, whatever. And I'd like to know her point of view. But the fact that, there's remote working today, we're not meeting people even in events. We're not meeting people face to face. Everything is virtual. We're so linear in the way we work in a seemingly dynamic environment like the internet. These kind of things really are going to be the future of how we interact
and
how we create.
Yeah. Look at these platforms. Look at Guestio, look at Cameo, look at Patreon. Some of these time will tell whether or not they are sustainable models or not. I like that the internet's giving everyone the ability to try it because...
And they're starting something.
They're starting something. And you are trying to get on this flywheel that in the end creates something similar to what I just described, right? I will trust a podcast host. You can do whatever you want because I like the content you put out and I want to make sure you get rewarded, whether you make me pay for every episode or make your guests pay for it. But this ability to then create a community around a creator and make sure everyone wins is the promise of Web3. And it's very early, and even in its early stage, I have barely understood where this is going. But I think I'm optimistic.
You remember, you were in the US for some time, but were you around when Venmo was around?
No, it was just after.
I remember reading this stuff about Venmo, and I'm like, what is Venmo?
Yeah.
And then we had UPI and GPay and Bharat Pay and a whole bunch of other things. And I'm like, oh, dude, this is Venmo. Because there used to be all of these like memes and comic strips and jokes about Venmoing. And I'm like, what is a Venmo, right? What's going on? And in such a short time, what was completely alien to me and almost ridiculous to think of has become commonplace. I can't survive without being able to virtually pay somebody. Everything is on my virtual bank account and, using some kind of a virtual payment platform where I can pay. And that has happened to all of our Indians, right down to people who are trading at the market floors, which is like groceries and live produce, right up to people who are trading on a daily basis in terms of other commodities.
QR code on.
Yeah, a QR code.
Stabbing in a banana somewhere.
Yeah, I really want valets to have a QR code, man. I really, really do. But the only thing is that I don't know who I'm paying at the end of the day. Because, and how rude is it to sit and scan somebody's badge? But carrying cash has become a thing of the past. And then this whole concept of working virtually. So then it made us want, it's not like we're not eating, drinking and buying clothes and doing other things. It's just become far more virtual in how we access them. And then all of this is going to follow suit. This is more tertiary in nature, like trying to get somebody to come onto your podcast and pay for them is more tertiary. But we've already finished the primary stuff. We are buying our groceries and are paying our bills through through virtual ways and through platforms. So why not?
You and I were in Bombay last week, and when we landed back at the Bangalore airport, there was a giant billboard which gave me so many things to think about. One is Under Armour had endorsed Neeraj Chopra, right? Huge deal. And I remember us when he won that gold medal last year upstairs, and the Indian hockey team did well. And we were so proud of our Indian athletes. But the line below it said, the only way is through. When we were talking about Mark Andreessen on the Good Time podcast a couple of weeks ago, the one thing he said when he talked about tech and Web3 and even streaming as an example closer to our industry is he said something very interesting. He said, look, just because the market was distorted and Netflix got hammered and now they're sort of struggling and getting back on their feet, and they probably will, it doesn't mean other broadcasting companies should think, okay, fine, streaming is not a thing anymore. No. This wave has begun. The only way is through. We have to get to the other side, and we'll have to figure out sustainable ways to do it. Diversity of revenue, sustainable models, etc., etc. But we live in very interesting times now, because look at all of this. We just spent 10 minutes talking about something that I probably understand 0.1% about.
Legitimacy?
Not legitimate, but Web3 at large.
Web3, yes.
And I think it's exciting because the industry that we know and love and are part of is going to look dramatically different a year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now. And that is something that's exciting because it's hard to comprehend. I feel like we're on a roller coaster of sorts. The last 2 years gave us a negative way to be exposed to the concept of an exponential curve, which is COVID. No one knew. I meet 5 people, they meet 25 people, and just the fact that it could spread that freely is something that no human being is tuned to comprehend. So I think we're living in exciting, turbulent times and witnessing change so big that my mind is just not able to wrap itself around it. And I find that exciting about our industry.
And the only way is
through.
Yeah. So what were your favorite moments from season 1 as we come to the end of this episode?
We did one episode which we shelved.
Yes.
Because it was so bad. And that was
the first one.
It was the first one we did. Because putting yourself out there, we have always been, as a company and as individuals, we are not very active on social media other than Instagram stories, which disappear in 24 hours, which I know I love following our colleagues, and I follow you on Instagram, and I get that picture. But none of us put our public opinions, our opinions out there in the public. And
I think it's the way we've been taught, even at school. I think it's more conditioning rather than anything else, which is why I find a lot of the other, like people either who are on the edge, who are either journalists or who genuinely don't seem to think that anybody's really going to care about what they're going to say, and they just say it anyway. And even maybe Americans and people who are outside of India, the way they're able to express stuff on Twitter and things like that is free form.
Yeah. But it's an exciting industry. And I think as a consumer of the industry and as a tech player in the industry, this podcast has taken me and us on this journey where I loved that first episode that went live. There was a bit of a rush.
Yeah. And these mics, these cool mics.
All of it. We geek out over all sorts of tech in our company. And we have Anil, who's just waiting to rip this mic apart and see what's on the inside. And that first podcast that went live was a rush. And then all the work we've had to do every week, the research, building a community within our own office through our Slack channels, getting everybody to weigh in. And you once said, I think 2 episodes in, you said, look, we're on this train now. There's no going back. There's no saying, I'm not up to the task. Just figure out a way to make it a part of your
We went to Singapore and we recorded our podcast there.
2 hours after landing.
Yeah.
And exchanging dollars for Singapore dollars, which is still old school, but I can't move around a foreign country without cash in my pocket.
Did you even spend it? Did you even spend it?
No, it's...
I rest my case.
I can't do it. But I'm from there to the episode where we broke down IPL rights, to the episode where we jammed about live sport and CTV. There are so many things now in our industry that are at early stages in their own life cycle, but have the potential to be everything. And that for me is exciting because we are now running out of time to dig into all of these things, to research all of them. And I think that's exciting.
I agree. I think some of the highlights of of these 13 episodes was, of course, recording the Singapore one, because I thought it wouldn't come out well, and it was fine. It was really good, and I was really fearful of the fact that one of us would say, let's not do it, and that
I
would
was
be
almost-
that would be the downfall, the beginning of the downfall. The other part is how we've got this crew together, right? Every Friday we have Santosh, Gautam, Leena, Rohan, you, me, everybody in this little office space, and we're all like sitting here, and we have these ring lights and our laptops and these are phones that are recording us and our cool cameras. Like you said, we love to geek out on this stuff. It's also about dressing up for the part. So it keeps us committed to it, and we have a lot of other people whose time we value. So we don't kind of lax out on it either. It's also kept me on my toes during the week, because I know that I have to come to this podcast on Friday and say something of note. So it's great. And also friends and family who have messaged us and, sort of egged us on to do more, and have asked us questions and have left nice little notes. I know that you have Mike, who writes to you often and tells Mark Pryor, who writes to you often. And we take everything that everybody says seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much to our listeners.
What are you looking forward to in season 2, man?
I am looking forward to going deeper on specific topics. There are some ideas floating around on new formats, on maybe getting other guests in.
I'm excited about that.
Yeah.
I want some guests.
Yeah. I think whatever we do, we'll make it exciting. We'll make it fun because we're having a good time doing this. And we'll put out some notes about what we're going to do that's different. But I'm excited to start going a little deeper into some of these topics. And of course, we have fed the algorithms that be to just give us a lot more interesting content every week. And that's actually just growing.
Yeah, I remember both of us sat down, and I'm like, how do you manage your LinkedIn feed? And then we sat and liked and unliked a whole bunch, so that we curated our LinkedIn feed to have certain types of articles that came our way in time.
Yeah. Technology makes it easier to do this now.
Once you actually know what to do, instead of you being slave to it, right?
Yeah.
So you got to be smart.
I remember when we started the company, we used to fly up and down to Bombay and Delhi a lot. And that's when on one of those trips you said, hey, do you know how hard this would have been without Uber? Because we just land Uber from meeting to meeting to meeting and come back. And we actually could not imagine what would have happened 10 years ago to entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Who didn't have that.
Those cheap hotels, what were they called?
Oyo
rooms. We have some horror stories. Tribo, yeah.
All of them.
And even Swiggy.
Airbnbs.
Even WeWork. Just swiping in and getting into a space for us to work in.
Yeah. Even this, the fact that we can curate a bunch of apps to give us content that we can then read, consume, synthesize, give it to our team, get their take on it. The fact that our phones are shooting this and not professional grade equipment. I remember there was a movie called Tangerine that came out.
This is professional grade equipment,
yes,
man.
You remember when Tangerine came out? It was a movie that I think premiered at the Sundance Festival. And the big story was that it was shot entirely on iPhones, and it blew my mind. And I watched it and I was like, it doesn't look any different.
There was an iPhone film festival once upon a time. Yeah. Yeah.
So we started this episode with Apple, and we are ending it with Apple.
Yeah.
My goodness.
Oh my God. Momentous. Tim Cook, I hope you're listening. All right. Okay. Thank you everybody for listening in, and send in your suggestions as to what we have to do in season 2. See you.
See you. Thank you. Thank you so much. And shout out to Gautam Kashyap, Rohan, Santosh and Leena, our team. And we look forward to season 2 with you guys.
Bye.